We're going to talk about clash of values. So we're going to talk about differing sets of values between different sects of Americans. So we're going to look at resurgence of nativism. So we're going to talk about the KKK, and then we're going to look at some of the values of the flappers and what was going on there. And then we're going to talk about even like kind of the fundamentalist attitude of the 1920s as well. So lots to talk about today. Let's get it started. So nativism resurges. So in the 20s, racism and nativism increased. So these are very similar ideas. So racism, obviously, we all know what that is, but nativism is the idea that if you're not from here, then we don't like you. Okay, so there's something wrong. So this is also it is against immigrants, obviously. So immigrants and then demobilized military men and women started to compete for the same jobs, and so there's going to be a very large ethnic prejudice against certain ethnicities. So we're going to talk about Italians here in a second, but Irish, especially during this time, and then obviously African Americans and that as well. But ethnic prejudice was the basis of the Sacco and Vanzetti case. So these are two immigrant men. They were Italians, and they were accused of murder and theft. So they were anarchists. So that means that they oppose all forms of government. And so that's another thing. They didn't, people didn't like them because of that as well. And in the end, Sacco and Vanzetti will be sentenced to death. In 1927, they were executed, even though they were still proclaiming their innocence. But the big important thing about this is this trial was not about necessarily, it was about murder, but it really came into question on whether or not these people should be allowed to exist, basically, because them being anarchists really, really looked poorly on them. And so the jury was very anti-immigrant at that time. Okay, so nativists use the idea of eugenics. So this is a false science of the improvement of hereditary traits. So the idea is you get like if you want a smart kid, then you get two people who are very smart, get them together, and then their child is going to be very, very smart. But these ideas, the ideas of eugenics, are going to support the arguments against immigration, because the idea is that, okay, if you want smart people, you put smart people together, but once you put somebody who is not as smart in that equation, then you're going to get not as smart people. Okay, so you're going to get kind of inferior people with qualities that we don't want. And that's what eugenics is. And so this further promoted the idea of strict immigration control, because people didn't want like lower qualities to get into the genetic mix. Okay. So the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, is going to leave the movement to restrict immigration. This new Klan, this is not only going to target, obviously, African Americans, but also Catholics, Jews, and immigrants. So basically anybody who was believed to have un-American values. They targeted them, and they harassed and terrorized them. And by 1924, the KKK had over 4 million members, and they stretched even into the northern cities. So they were not just regulated to the southern states anymore. They're moving north. And so scandals and poor leadership led to the decline of the Klan in the late 20s. And then the politicians who were supported by them were all voted out of office. And so there's going to be a major decline of the Klan towards the end of the 20s, and obviously it's almost non-existent today. 1921, President Harding is going to sign the Emergency Quota Act, and this will limit immigration to 3% of the total number of people in any ethnic group who already live in the United States. So this is going to really discriminate against Southern and Eastern Europeans, because before this, it was mostly Western Europeans that were here. Okay, so especially Italians and especially Eastern Europeans were not allowed in. And so you can kind of see this political cartoon that, kind of shows all these people wanting into the United States, but only 3% are allowed in. Okay, and so that's kind of how that went. So the National Origins Act of 1924 is going to make immigrant restriction a permanent policy. And so the act actually lowered the quotas to 2% of each national group, which will further restrict the Southern and Eastern Europeans from coming over. But the act exempted immigrants from the Western Hemisphere from the quota. So if you were coming in from Mexico or from Canada, you were exempted from this. You could come and go as you please, which is total opposite of what's going on now. But these acts reduce the labor pool in the U.S., so employers need laborers for agriculture, mining, railroad work. And so Mexican immigrants started pouring in looking for more jobs in between 1914 and the end of the 20s. So we're going to see a large Mexican immigration coming in looking for jobs. And these immigrants fled their country in the aftermath of the Mexican Revolution of 1910. So they're escaping war and they're coming into the United States and trying to look for jobs. So the New Morality. So the New Morality challenged traditional ideas. It glorified youth and personal freedom. There were new ideas about marriage, work, and pleasure that affected the way people live. So women were much more free. They started to break away from their families. They started entering the workforce and earning their own livings. Even some of attending college. And one of the reasons why they're going to see a lot of this freedom is the invention of the automobile. So the automobile gave American youth the opportunity to pursue interests away from their parents. So if you are on a date, you can go in the car and you're away from everybody else. It's just you in the car. And so there was a lot more freedom that's going to be brought up. There's a lot more places you can go. And so you're not just kind of surrounded by your family all the time. You can get out and hang out with your friends and you can do all kinds of different things because of the automobile. So women's fashion is going to drastically change in the 20s. So the flapper, the young, dramatic, stylish, and unconventional woman is going to emerge. And the flapper smoked cigarettes, she drank illegal liquor, and she wore revealing clothes. So this is some examples of some flappers of the 1920s. And professionally, women are going to make advances in the fields of science, medicine, law, and literature as well. So they're going to start to become more educated, and they're going to get out a little bit more and live it up. Okay, so the fundamentalist movement. So on the other side of this, you have the fundamentalist movement. So some Americans are fearing this new morality and worried about America's social decline. So most of this is coming out of rural towns, and this idea is going to join a religious movement that was known as fundamentalism. So this idea rejected Darwin's theory of evolution that we developed from lower forms of life over millions of years. So fundamentalists believed in creationism. So creationism is the idea that God created the world as it is described in the Bible. Okay, so in 1925, Tennessee will pass the Butler Act, which basically made it illegal to teach anything that denied creationism and taught evolution instead. Okay, so you were not allowed to teach evolution. And so this is going to all come to a head with what's called the Scopes trial. Okay, so like I said, it came to a head with the Scopes trial. So the ACLU put out an advertisement that called for a teacher to defy the Butler Act. Okay, so John T. Scopes, who is a biology teacher, volunteered to defy this act by teaching evolution in his class. And so he was arrested and he was put on trial and he was found guilty, but later the case will be overturned. So he was found guilty of violating the Butler Act for teaching a scientific truth. But after the trial, many fundamentalists withdrew from political activism because this was a major loss for them. Okay, so prohibition. So many people felt the passage of the 18th Amendment that prohibited the sale of alcohol would reduce unemployment, domestic violence, and poverty. Spoiler alert, it does not. Excuse me. So the Volstead Act is going to basically enforce the 18th Amendment. So this is going to enforce prohibition, and it gives that responsibility to the Treasury Department. So that means the Treasury Department now has what are called police powers. So this is where an agency of the government has the power to control people and their property. Okay, and what's the best public interest? Okay, so the U.S. Department of the Treasury had the responsibility of enforcing prohibition. Americans ignored the laws of prohibition, as with anything that is ever prohibited. Americans don't like being told what to do. I don't know if you guys know this. You could tell this with the recent mask mandates. People don't like wearing masks. They don't. Americans like their freedom. That's how Americans are. So they're going to defy it, and so they go to secret bars called speakeasies where alcohol could be purchased. And so crime became big business because these gangsters were making a lot of money off of the sale of this black market alcohol. And so gangsters corrupted many local politicians and governments, trying to get them to look the other way. And then finally in 1933, the 21st Amendment will be ratified, and that will actually end prohibition. And so this will be a victory for modernism and a defeat for the supporter of traditional values, because alcohol will be able to be sold again, and it's now it's everywhere. You guys can't because you're not old enough, but people in general can go get it at their leisure. Okay, that's all I got for you today. Don't forget to do your processor. Have a good day.